I want to thank Flood as well as Nick of Night Nation for this opportunity to take part in this project, this chance to do lectures, because this is something I really believe in. And I really like the high quality of the work that Nick does. And when Nick told me that Flood has been doing some stuff specifically aimed at high quality, high IQ stuff, and that I might be interested, I jumped at it. In my subsequent discussions with Flood, where I grew to understand what he's been doing technically, I must tell you, this guy has pulled off something really important. Flood probably has achieved something that nobody has ever achieved in the white right anywhere. It is very possible that he's done stuff and solved problems that nobody has ever solved in the white right. I walk away with that impression. I urge people to support the work of Flood. Now, there are many lectures that I'd like to give on this platform, but I thought as the first one, because this is a new platform, I would do something that I've been thinking of doing for a very long time, because it's very apt to what Flood is doing and what Nick is doing, and also what FTJ are doing, because FTJ are a platform as well. And I want to discuss the importance of us having our own businesses, organizations, groups, etc. Things that we own and we control it completely. And living here in South Africa, I can give you some unique perspectives, and you also look around in your country where you live, and you'll see the things that I'm telling you are true. Now, the big problem that, let's say, conservative and racial whites have is that we are banned from speaking our minds. We live in countries that are supposedly democratic, that supposedly have got freedoms for the common man, and then you'll suddenly discover that when you want to open your mouth, that all of a sudden there are people rushing to shut your flipping mouth. That all of a sudden people who are not even politicians. They're not even politicians. They are not the police. They are not the army. They are just people with money. And people with money will be coming at you, telling you how to shut your mouth, and that they are not going to give you publicity. Now, here in South Africa, when I got involved in activism in the year 2000, when the blacks were busy invading the farms of white people in Zimbabwe, which used to be Rhodesia, which is where I grew up, I decided for the first time in my life to get up and to start making comments about political events. And within a year or two, I soon realized how quickly all these rich bastards come to shut you up. They come to shut you up. They want to shut your mouth from having the ability to say what you honestly and truthfully think about a particular situation. All of a sudden, all of these bastards will come and tell you that you are not allowed to speak the truth. Even if what you're saying is totally and utterly 100% exactly correct, and you have the evidence for it, you have photos, you have recordings, you've got videos, and all that you are doing is you are just telling the truth. That's all you're doing. You are not even expressing a political opinion even. You're just telling the damn truth. And you'll find that all these wealthy bastards and people with power are in your face immediately telling you not to speak the truth. You're not even allowed to tell the truth, even just the raw, straight truth, without even having an opinion this way or that way. You're not allowed to talk about this suddenly. And in my early years, I learned that maybe I need to do something more than just talk a bit. I appeared on radio 1 or 2 times in the early days. I knew someone who was a radio presenter in Cape Town, And because of a previous book that I'd written, this lady invited me to talk about this stuff on the air, on a liberal radio station. And I went on there and I appeared on there, and then she said, oh, this was great. And the audience, even a mixed race audience, they loved it. They loved this stuff. Even non-white people were liking it because they were saying that, the things that the two of us are talking about, she was a white woman, and we were talking about what was happening in Zimbabwe. And even the non-whites were saying, yes, it's the truth, and it's nice to hear the truth. Well, it didn't take long for other things to suddenly start happening. So we did a show. People were even phoning in, asking questions. We were giving answers. And we had a ball, and the audience had a ball. And so she said, oh, you must come on to another show, next week. Let's do another show next week, okay? And the moment that we started now talking about it, slowly you started seeing all the enemies of the truth moving in. First it was a guy from a political party, the leading political party in South Africa, the ANC. And this guy would come onto the show and he'd start talking a whole bunch of nonsense. And I would just quietly start telling him, but, this thing you're saying is not true. That thing is not true. Here are the things that you've been leaving out. You didn't tell the people about this. You didn't tell them about that. And can you believe, after totally beating this guy on the air, live on the air in one show, the next time I was on a show and this political party guy was back on there talking his nonsense, the next time they started cutting me off. The white producer, the white liberal producer of the show, was starting to cut me off the air. So then when that guy's busy talking, they dropped the phone line. And I found this out because the journalist who'd invited me onto her show, she phoned me after the show and she said, I saw them. They went and pressed the button and cut you off. And then I'm busy trying to phone back to get in on the show. It takes me 5 minutes or whatever. I've missed out on what the guy has said. And every show thereafter, it just got worse and worse until eventually I wasn't allowed on the show itself. And sometime later, they even fired this journalist. They fired her without any warning. So that was my entry point into what happens when other people have got infrastructure and they control that infrastructure and they decide that what you are saying, regardless of how true it is, that regardless of what you're saying, you're not allowed to say it, and you're not going to say it on their platform. Then I went and I wrote a book. My book is called Government by Deception. I published it at my own expense in 2001. And then, once I'd taken my own personal life savings to have all these books printed so that I don't have an editor in a company telling me that, no, you can't say this, you can't say that, you're not allowed to write like that, etc. I had used my own money to decide what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it, and I will print it at my expense. So then I thought, okay, now I've got my book. I want to start selling it. I need a website, and I put up a website in order to start selling my book. But then I wanted to advertise. So I went to another radio station and I said to them, I'd like to put an advert on your show, an advert on air. How much does it cost? This is what I want to advertise. This is my book and this is what I want to advertise. And they turned me down. Here I am. I want to pay for an advert, whatever their going rates were, and they would have nothing to do with me. I went to major newspapers. I said to the newspapers, I'd write to them and I'd say to them, I see you're doing book reviews. Do you do book reviews on new books? Because I've written a book. And they'll write back to me, they'll email me and they'll say, yes, we do book reviews, send your book. And then I'd write back to them and I'd say, okay, what address do I need to drop it off at or post it to? and this is my book. And I say to them, this is my book, Government by Deception, and they don't do book reviews. I go to the newspapers and I say to them, I'd like to place an advert, either a partial page advert or even just a classified advert, and this is what I want to put into it. What's your rate? I'll pay you. And they wouldn't let me place an advert. So here I am, even willing to pay them their rates, and all of them turn me away. In the end, I only managed to find 1 or 2 bookstores that actually would even stock my book. So this was my introduction to politics and to telling the truth. And I learned that within the first few couple of years, that the reason why things are so silent on certain topics is not because people aren't willing to speak out. It's not because people aren't willing to write. It's because the owners of the newspapers, the owners of the radio stations, the very people who claim that they are there to give the news, to spread the truth, they will shut you up. And who the hell are they? Who the hell are they to make the rules to tell you that you're not supposed to talk about something? Who the hell are they? They're not the government. And nothing that is being written or spoken is against the law. Nothing. Everything that I wanted to say, everything that I wrote was totally and utterly allowed by the law of the country. And all of these bastards who own these different businesses are suddenly shutting the door. There's nothing illegal that's going on here, and they tell you, no, we're not interested, and that's that. So that then taught me that for myself, the only thing that I had, because this was in the days before social media, and then I realized that, the only thing I've got is my website. I own my own website. That thing that I own is the only thing that allows me to speak the truth. It is the one thing that I own that allows me to communicate with people. And people came to my website. And lots of people came to my website. Troublemakers came to my website. Enemy agents came to my website. But at least I had a place. And then something happened. There was another guy, another young white guy, an Afrikaans guy. And he decided to also do something. He decided to create a website. He decided to fight crime. And he went at it. But what I didn't know was that this guy had been a type of a liberal, in reality probably a homosexual, and he had connections through the mass media because he'd been doing activism for those kinds of people. And all those same platforms allowed that. Anyway, he then decided to create his own website and use all his links to the mass media to kick off his thing. And his thing started growing wildly. It grew wildly, quickly. Within a few weeks, it was growing at an unbelievable pace. Then suddenly these bastards who own those companies suddenly realize, oh, someone that they had previously trusted when he was just a homosexual, the homosexual's now telling the truth. And all those media companies and journalists start focusing on him. And they then start nibbling away at him to see how are they going to stop him. And it took them a while, and eventually they figured out maybe they can nail him on the issue of receiving money. And eventually they managed to get the cops to go after him and to arrest him. And then when they wrote this up in the mass media, they mentioned my website as if to embarrass me. Well, the next thing I saw a ton of new people coming to my website who didn't know my website even existed. So it was a case of there's no such thing as bad publicity. All publicity is good publicity. And I was so impressed when I saw all these people pouring in onto my website. I even put up like a special page. Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my website, etc., etc. And that taught the mass media bastards to never again mention my website. Because even if they mentioned my website in a negative way, it didn't actually harm me because I didn't care. And there was nothing I was doing wrong. And they themselves could find absolutely nothing that they could use against me. So that was the last time that the mass media mentioned my website, because they learned a little bit from that lesson. But those interactions showed me what happens when people control companies, when people have got staff working for them, and they control companies, how they can decide what gets into the media, what doesn't get into the media, who can they focus on, and if they find somebody that they don't like, then they start working together and they start nibbling away in all kinds of ways until they manage to destroy that person. So the homosexual guy, for example, he ended up with some jail time for fraud. But for a very short while, he'd told the truth. He'd actually told the truth. But now it's been jail time for him for fraud, and he's wiped out and he disappears. He never gets back onto the scene ever again. He's gone. So those are among the early things that I saw in the first 5 or 6 years that I started a website in the early days. And then at that time, websites were drawing large numbers of people. Back then, for me to get 120,000 visitors to my website every month was no problem at all. To get 120,000 actual real human beings to visit your website was not a problem. I was getting 120,000 visitors every month without any problem. And they would be reading something like 250,000 pages on my website every month. And I thought this was great. Then at a point, there was the murder of a guy called Eugene Terblanche in South Africa. And I went and I wrote something quite spicy and put it out. And I told my supporters to spread it far and wide. And then what happened was I had the greatest month that I'd ever had on my website ever, unmatched to this day. And it was that I got 250,000 people coming to my website and viewing 500,000 pages of articles on my website in 1 month. That was my all-time total. And then, a few years later, something new appeared on the scene. And the thing that appeared was called social media. And social media started drawing people away from my website. And also, I watched as Google, in the early days, the search engines were sending lots and lots of people through to my website. All the search engines were sending lots of people through to my website. And as the years went by, I watched how the search engines send less and less and less people to your website. And now everyone's rushing off to the social media, and people are moving away from the websites. However, the social media is owned by other rich people. And as the years go by, they start controlling the people on the social media, and they start shutting them up. Nowadays, now in the 2020s, all of you are fully aware of how the social media censors you, bans you, shadow bans you. All of the social media do it. And again, have you been banned because you put something illegal on there? Something that's against the law in your country? I will bet you that not one of you has ever posted anything that breaks the law. And yet, these bastards who own these companies are telling you what you are not allowed to speak about. No matter what you are posting, that is totally true. At the time that I'm recording this, there is some thunder, so maybe some of it might get on this recording. But anyway, to continue forward. I've been on the internet for 27 years now, and in that time I've watched how this thing works. And all of these big corporations are telling people what is allowed, which speech is allowed, and which speech is not allowed. And they come up with all kinds of bogus, garbage reasons as to why they are kicking you off, stopping you from saying what you want to say, stopping you even from just telling very basic, totally truthful things, either about current events or past events. So this should show you that after these first decades of the internet, that it is hardly ever the government or even the laws that forbid you from saying certain things or doing certain things. It is the owners who you either know who they are, or in other cases, depending on which media it is, you might not even know who these people are. And these people take it upon themselves to come and shut us up. They are not the government. They do not make the laws. They do not enforce the laws. They come and they make their own rules. And then they start telling millions of people what they are and aren't allowed to say. So the one thing that I'd learned from my experiences in those first 5 to 10 years was I walked away with the firm belief that you are always going to be facing problems if you go to these big corporations and you go onto their media, because they will control you. They will censor you. They will do things to stop you. And sadly, we don't have the money to go and take these people to court and fight them in court, because they are just making all kinds of decisions of their own accord. So the other thing is to have your own platform. And later on, I slowed down for a couple of years. For a couple of years, I slowed down. I lost a bit of interest and motivation. And eventually, I discovered YouTube. And I decided, okay, well, everyone else is on the social media. Let me do something on the social media. And I went onto YouTube, and I was there for 18 months. And in the beginning, it was fun, and I started getting supporters. My channel was growing, and every now and then I could see, this video of mine, this thing is starting to go a bit viral now. And then all of a sudden it stops going viral. And then the complaints start coming in. I discovered that legal complaints were coming into YouTube. Legal complaints. All of a sudden, people in different countries are writing lawyers' letters to YouTube saying, you must stop this video on this channel. You must stop that video on the channel. Initially, YouTube was quite nice about it. And they've got a legal department, and they said, no problem, they'll deal with all the legal issues. Within a year and a half, there were 800 legal complaints about my videos, coming from mostly European countries. And I'm sure you can guess probably who was behind those legal complaints. Anyway, eventually they ended up banning my YouTube channels 10 times until I decided, well, I'm not going to bother with YouTube anymore. And where do I go to now? I went back to my own website. So after 27 years on the internet, the only thing that I've seen that really gives you some kind of protection is that you need to own and control your own platform. And I've been telling people all along, especially in recent years, that we need our own platforms. We need our own platforms that we own and we control them, because that is the only way that we are going to be able to have our free speech. The only way that we'll be allowed to say all the things that we are legally allowed to say is by owning and controlling our own platforms. There is no other way out of it. And in this lecture, I want to show you more examples of other people, even of other races, who do things, and they do things as a group, and the things that they manage to get to work as a group. And for me, when I look at this, the lessons are clear that if you want to do something serious and you want to achieve something that has value, then we need to create lots of organizations of all kinds. Everything from small businesses to non-profit organizations to NGOs to all kinds of organizations that you are allowed to create legally. These are the things we need to create for ourselves to help our own people. And I want to show you some of the things that I've seen people do. And I do want to tell you that I knew many Jewish people. I used to know lots of Jewish people, and the Jews have got lots and lots and lots of small organizations as well, not just big ones. They've got hundreds of all kinds of small organizations, and they work together as a group. But they aren't the only ones. And these are the kinds of things that we have to learn to do. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. This is the population of smaller groups of people in South Africa. South Africa's actual population is over 50 million people. But inside South Africa, whites make up 4.5 million, which is about 7.3% of the population. And then in South Africa, we've got Indians. We've got Indians and Asians, but there aren't many Asians that are not Indians. The Chinese and other Asians are actually a very, very tiny group, very tiny. Indians make up like 95% of all Asians in South Africa. And the Indian population is 1.7 million. They make up 2.7% of the population. Now, South Africa has got Muslims, and the Muslims are between 1.1 to 1.3 million people. But 95% or 90% of the Indians, the vast majority of the Indians, are actually Muslims as well. That number of Muslims might be a little bit on the low side compared to what it really is. The vast majority of Indians are also Muslims. There are some Hindus, but not many. So in South Africa, the term Muslim and Indian is almost exactly the same thing. There are a handful of blacks who are Muslims. There are also tiny, tiny numbers of whites. Very tiny, very, very tiny numbers of whites that are Muslims. Probably you can count them in the dozens, or at the most maybe 100 or something, maximum. And then another group that also have some Muslims are colored people. These are mixed race people. But in South Africa, as a general rule, you can take it that Muslim and Indian is almost interchangeable. But these Indians/Muslims are less than half of the population of the whites, as you can see there. And yet, I'm going to show you what the Indians/Muslims do in South Africa that whites would never even think of doing, despite us being more than them. In 2020, the Jews came at me for some things that I posted on my website. It had to do with them going after people, and I published it on my website. And so let's call it the local ADL. The local ADL types came at me, and they were busy trying every means, every fake means, to try and get me into court and get me arrested in the same way that they were doing to other people of different races even. And it was quite a struggle to get a lawyer. It was a real battle to get a lawyer. So this caused me to start looking for non-white lawyers, because I was thinking to myself, the white lawyers are such cowards and they're not willing to just go to court and take on your case. So then I decided, let me see if I can get hold of a Muslim lawyer. And that turned into a very interesting exercise, because I then started contacting Muslims and Indians and then tried to get to lawyers. And in the process of phoning them, going to them, and moving around in their areas, I began to see things that I'd never even known existed. So if you'll look on the screen in front of you, you'll see a headline. And there's a headline that was published, and the headline says, Islamic banking continues to grow in South Africa. There you can even see some blacks who are Muslims. And it says, an increasing awareness and understanding that every obligation attached to one's wealth needs to be fulfilled in the proper manner is spurring a local boom in demand for alternative financial products and services from Islamic financial services. So it turned out that Muslims were not only getting big banks that are basically owned by, let's say, whites and Jews to give them Muslim-compatible financial services, but I discovered that there were actual Muslim banks. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. If you go and you search on Google, for example, about Islamic or Muslim banking in South Africa, you'll get something like this. There you can see there is the Islamic Bank of South Africa. There is mention of Islamic finance in South Africa. And if you look more to the middle, slightly to the right, you'll see that major banks in South Africa, the top one in blue, the one that says Sharia banking, that is Standard Bank. Standard Bank is a big white-owned corporation in South Africa, and it does Sharia banking. Below it, the one with honoring 20 years of our tradition and your trust, that is First National Bank in South Africa. There you can see another one saying Sharia compliant. And then below it, you'll see their LinkedIn, and it says Al Baraka Bank, South Africa. So in South Africa, even though Muslims are a pretty small portion of the population, as you saw earlier, they insist on getting banking that is compliant with their religion. So there you can see Muslims get banking services even from, let's call it, white/Jewish commercial banks that is compliant with their religion. And these banks are all rushing to service these customers. And nobody's saying to them, you know, you're anti-Christian or you're anti-Jewish or you're anti-anything. They're just rushing to give these people the services that they want. And the Muslims stand firm on their religious principles. I should add that the Indians are natural traders and businessmen. And in South Africa, the Indians are the group of non-whites who are the richest. There are Indians in South Africa who've got seriously big businesses. I'm talking seriously big businesses. There are Indians/Muslims in South Africa who are multi-millionaires, even by American standards. Even if you converted their money into US dollars, they wouldn't quite be billionaires in American terms, but they'd be worth many tens of millions of American dollars. There are a lot of Muslims/Indians, who've got serious amounts of money. And they work together as a team. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. Here you can see some more examples. And most of these banks are, let's call it, white Western banks that are falling over each other to provide financial services to Muslims in South Africa. There at the top you can see FNB, First National Bank. This is from a Google search, Islamic Finance Solutions. We offer a range of solutions to ensure your bank in a Sharia compliant way. You'll even see there's the Banking Association of South Africa, and there's a paper, an academic paper on Islamic banking in South Africa. And in this case, it says a fully fledged Islamic bank is formed to solely offer Islamic financial services. There you'll see Standard Bank, Sharia banking. Invest in an account that is certified Sharia compliant by the Independent Sharia Advisory Committee of Standard Bank. Then below that you'll see an actual bank that is a Islamic bank, Al Baraka Bank, South Africa, providing communities across the country with a practical and sustainable alternative option to conventional banking modes. Our Sharia banking compliant. And then there's ABSA. ABSA is actually a bank that is derived from a bunch of Afrikaans-owned banks. ABSA is a bunch of Afrikaans banks. One of them was called Volkskas, one of them was called Trust Bank, and eventually all those things merged together into the thing that you see as ABSA. So it's actually originally big Afrikaans money, and guess what? It says, we do Islamic banking. And of course, Afrikaners are Christians, mostly, and they don't care. They are doing Sharia-compliant accounts for Muslims. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. There you can see the website for Al Baraka Bank. There it is. And it's a proper bank, and it's a bank for Muslims. It's a Muslim bank for Muslims, and it functions in South Africa. So you can see along the top, it's got all the different options. It's got personal, business, about Al Baraka, understanding your rights, internet banking, etc. And there you can see down the middle, it's got other menu options where you can see Muslim options. It's Ijara, which is a lease. Murabaha, which is cost plus sale. But there it is. There is a pretty fancy looking bank, for supplying banking services to a rather small but pretty wealthy group of people in South Africa. And they're doing their own thing. I will add that in South Africa you also get an African bank. You may wonder, since the vast majority of the population of South Africa is actually black, are there any black banks? There might be more than one, but the original black bank, the bank that has been around the longest, is a bank called African Bank. That's its actual name. African Bank has been around for decades. And you would imagine that the blacks would want to deal with African Bank. Well, actually, African Bank is a pretty small bank compared to all the other banks that exist. Banking in South Africa is dominated by, let's call it, Western-type banks. Western-type banks, let's say white/Jewish banks. They dominate banking in South Africa. And one of the most successful banks, the single most successful bank that was created, let's say to service the poor, especially a black clientele, that bank is called Capitec. Capitec was started by a white Afrikaner. A white Afrikaner was the creator and owner of Capitec, and he turned it into the biggest new bank in South Africa that is almost up there with the others like Standard Bank and First National Bank. It's almost in their league, and it was created by a white guy, white Afrikaans guy, and he actually sold all his shares in the bank in recent years, which might not be a positive sign, but a white man actually created the biggest non-white bank in the country, Capitec. And it handles the poor. It's specifically designed for people with low incomes. And actually, lots of whites have got accounts, even in Capitec. Anyone can open an account in Capitec. Capitec doesn't have like checking accounts. Capitec actually only has a savings account. And so even if you put a little bit of money into it, you'll earn a teeny weeny bit of interest. And that was designed and made by a white Afrikaner. It's quite a unique bank, and it's very successful. And even a lot of whites even use Capitec. But I thought I'd just mention that on the side. So it'll give you a bit of an idea of how banking in South Africa works. And I am sure that you are surprised at how banking in South Africa actually works compared to what you might have imagined it is like. So take a closer look at the image on the screen in front of you. There's more of the menu on that Al Baraka Bank. You can see it's got Musharaka, which is a partnership. I'm not going to mention all the other names, but you can see partnership, venture capital, Islamic bonds, transactional accounts, investments. Here is another special Muslim thing, premature withdrawal of Mudaraba investment deposits, whatever that is, Hiba, a gift, profit calculation and distribution. And it carries on. These are specific features that these Muslims want in their bank, and the bank gives them all of that. If you'll take a look at the image on the screen in front of you, that's a bit of the blurb on the Al Baraka Bank, and it says, money is not considered to be a commodity in Islamic economics. Rather, it is viewed as a unit of account, medium of exchange, and a store of value. In other words, currencies are simply a means to attain an asset, product, or service. Now, listen to this, because this might have interest for whites. The use of money for the purposes of making money in the form of interest is expressly forbidden. So Muslims don't charge interest on money. It's against their religion, and their banking accounts for that. It says, wealth can be generated through legitimate trading, provision of services, and asset-based investments. The Islamic finance system prohibits dealings that involve receiving or payment of interest, riba, as well as investing in impermissible/unethical industries. One of the requirements for Sharia compliance is absolute transparency and the removal of any uncertainty and ambiguity in the contract. So those are their rules for their banking, and that's how their bank is supposed to work. That's what they want, and that's what they demand from their bank. They've got their value system, and they want their institution to run their way, period. Their institution is not for non-Muslims. It's not to accommodate Christians or Jews or anyone else. It's for their system the way they want it, and that's how they run it. They own it, and they make their rules, and they run it their way. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. There you can see a chart. That is a chart of Islamic banking in South Africa, the Islamic banking market in South Africa. So remember, These people are less than 2 million people. They're 1.7 million people, maybe even slightly less. Let's say 1.7 million people. And this is the banking they've got. And this is in rands. How many billions of rands are in this banking market? And on the top you can see deposits denominated in rands. So that's deposits going into the bank. And then there's deposits and advances. So it seems to me like they don't lend out that much money. It's almost to me as if more money is going in and not that much lending is taking place. That's my impression. But if you look at that, you'll see 30 billion back in, I think, 2019. So this is between about 2019 and 2021. You can see it's 30 billion growing to 45 billion. So looking at the average rand-dollar exchange rate in June 2021, 45 billion rands is the same as 3.2 billion US dollars. 3.2 billion US dollars. That's a pretty hefty sum, eh? For a little group of 1.7 million people. 3.2 billion US dollars in their own banking system. This is their banking system. And 1.7 million of them have got about 3.2 billion US dollars under their control and their system running by their rules. And they're not worried about what the blacks believe, what the Jews believe, what the whites believe. They want their banking for themselves according to their rules. And that gives them some interesting financial power, eh? For such a small group of people. So just sit and think about that. A tiny group of people in South Africa, a minority of people in South Africa, who are relatively well off, functioning on a level about equal to that of the whites, and that is what they can do with their money. Now, in South Africa, it's illegal to do anything on a racial basis. You couldn't start a bank for whites because that would be illegal. But if the Muslims can have a Muslim banking system, why can't white Christians have a Christian banking system? Or let's say white Christians start a Christian banking system for all Christians, because there are lots of blacks who are supposedly Christians as well. Why can't there be Christian banks in South Africa? That would not be illegal, and yet nobody even thinks about that. Of course, what I would like to see is a Church of Creativity banking system. Now that's the banking system I would like to join. A bunch of banks or a banking system for the Church of the Creator. That is what I'd like to see. Now let me show you another example from South Africa of people who realized the need and the importance of having their own organizations in order to save themselves. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. Those white men that you see there in that image, those are Afrikaners, Boers basically. Afrikaners, Boers, same thing. You're looking at a bunch of Boers who got together in the early part of the 1900s, and they decided to start doing something for Boers, because the Boers had two Boer republics here in South Africa. The Transvaal, known as the South African Republic, and the Orange Free State. Those were two white-owned countries, owned by Afrikaans whites. And the Afrikaners are basically 40% Dutch, 40% German, 20% French. That roughly describes the racial heritage of the Afrikaners. And these guys that you see here, these are the founders of an organization called the Broederbond, which is Afrikaans for the Brotherhood. There you can see them. These guys created the greatest organization that has probably ever been created in South Africa for a specific group of people. Now, they did this after the Second Anglo-Boer War. Basically, the Second Anglo-Boer War was basically globalism brought to you by the British Empire, and the Rothschilds decided that all the gold and diamonds of South Africa needs to be seized from the Afrikaners. And the vast majority of the Afrikaners were totally impoverished as a result of this war. Even now, in 2026, as I'm recording this, the Second Anglo-Boer War is unquestionably the largest and most brutal war ever fought on South African soil. All the other stuff that's happened, even with the blacks, is minor compared to the vicious brutality of the battle between the Boers and the British. It was the South African equivalent of Hitler's Germans fighting against the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and America. It was the South African equivalent of it. And the people who came out the big losers were the Afrikaners. Well, within less than 20 years of that, these Afrikaners decided that they're going to do something for their people, and now the Afrikaners have lost their country. They've lost control of their country. And the Jews and the British are running everything. And also, they were being discriminated against. Afrikaners were not allowed to create their own businesses. I had an uncle who became very wealthy in engineering, and he told me that in the 1920s, 1930s, when he was a young guy, you couldn't get into business in South Africa because all business in South Africa was basically, quotes, English. If you weren't English, then you couldn't have a business. So these Afrikaners decided they're going to do stuff for their own people and for their language. And they actually used their language as a critical part of this. And it was actually a stroke of genius. The end result was that these people, over the decades to come, built up massive businesses because they realized that they'd now lost control of their two Boer republics. They are now ruled by Britain, and they are aliens in their own country, on their own territory in places that they used to rule. And they are being discriminated against. And they decided, okay, well, what we need are things that we own. We have to own these things. We will control these things. We'll make the rules for these things. And they came up with this thing called the Broederbond, which is basically Afrikaans for the brotherhood. And I'll quickly show you the amazing feats that these people pulled off. These guys produced the most successful system of anyone in South Africa ever. Nobody pulled off what they pulled off. And their stuff worked within a couple of decades. They worked at it and they got it to work. And that bank, like you see, ABSA, for example, I showed you ABSA and I said to you, all the Afrikaans banks eventually merged into this thing called ABSA. These are the guys who started the banking and other systems and companies that went on to create Afrikaans business in South Africa. So they wanted their people to bring their money to them and not to be controlled by Britain and the Jews. They wanted their stuff that they control. And the Broederbond is a fantastic story. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. This is from a book that was published about them later. And in order to do what they set out to do, they actually formed a secret society. The Broederbond was a secret society, and people only joined it by invitation. You see, the nice thing about a society functioning by invitation only is that you don't have people who can infiltrate it. Because if you make it public and anyone can join, then your enemies will also know it exists and they will come and join it. But if you make it secret, then you invite people into it, people that you've checked out. So this, for example, are the statistics for how this secret society started. It started in about 1918. And you can see by 1920 it had one cell. So it met in one place, one group of guys got together, and the goal was later they would form cells all across South Africa. So in 1920 they had one cell, and there were 37 members in there. By 1925, they had 8 cells with 162 members. And you can see by 1935, there were 80 cells and 1,395 people there. By the end of World War II, 1945, there were 183 cells with 2,800 people in it. By 1955, 332 cells with 4,700 people in it. By 1965, 484 cells with almost 7,000 people in it. And then the last statistics are from 1977, where they had 810 cells with 12,000 members. So in the space of less than 60 years, in the space of about maybe 57 or 58 years, they went from 37 people to 12,000. But those were 12,000 chosen people who had tasks to do, and everybody had to do work, and they managed their money and their activities so that they could gain power. And their goal was to create all the organizations that they need. Some of them are going to make money. Others are not going to make money. They're going to be non-profits. And over and above that, they would also infiltrate people into places in government, places in the police, places in the army. Their goal was to take control of South Africa. They wanted to take control of South Africa from the English, from the British. And the Afrikaners had one advantage over the English. The Afrikaners had a bigger population than the English. And they reckoned they're going to be able to take control. They were actually Christians, and they saw themselves as Christian nationalists. And their basis was they were going to use the church as well. There were lots of pastors who were members of this organization. Their goal was to get real power in South Africa, take over the government of the country, because only white people could vote in South Africa. They wanted to get control of the white electorate, and they did so. They did so in 1948. In other words, in about 30 years, from the time those guys started until the time they took control of politics in South Africa, it was about 30 years. They got into power, they got the Prime Minister position in South Africa, they controlled the parliament, they had total political control of South Africa. And they saw to it that other broederbonders, or broeders as they called them, get into the army, get into the police, and so forth, so that they are everywhere. They've got their people in positions everywhere. This allowed this group to take over and control the politics of a couple of million whites. Those 12,000 guys, or if you go back to 1950, those 3,600 guys back in 1950 already controlled all of South African politics. And so they did everything. They had companies that they controlled, and they had spies and agents in all the things that they could not take control of directly, until, of course, they got political power, and with that they could make the laws, they could hire and fire people, and so on. And they were actually responsible for creating apartheid. They are the people behind apartheid, and they saw to it that the white man, especially the Afrikaans white man, has regained control, not just of the original Boer republics, but of all of South Africa. So the Afrikaners lost their 2 Boer republics, and the English had 2 British colonies, Natal and the Cape. Well, when they gained control of South African politics, they now controlled everything. They controlled the old British colonies, and they controlled the former Boer republics. They controlled all of South Africa for decades until they lost power in 1994. But that is what these guys achieved. And that's what comes out of tight white teamwork. When you work as a team, you create proper structures, you create everything you need. You create businesses where you can, you create non-profits where you can't. They also controlled the Afrikaans church. And they used the church as a powerful tool for them. And the Afrikaans church, even to this day, even though in terms of the numbers of people who actually go to church is now minuscule, the Afrikaans church still has tons of property and huge amounts of money in South Africa, even now. They basically took control of all of Afrikaans society. They took control of schooling. They took control of media. They created their own Afrikaans media so that they could put out their message in the way they wanted. So the English could discriminate against them as much as they wanted. The Afrikaners just pulled together as a team, plowed their money into the same things, worked out objectives for their group, and their group ultimately beat the English. Now that's teamwork. If you'll look at the image on the screen in front of you, in the late 1970s, the Jew-controlled mass media, the English media, because in South Africa, all English publications were pretty much Jew-controlled and owned. The Jew-controlled mass media actually published this book that you see on the screen in front of you. It's called Broederbond, the Super Afrikaners Exposed, the most powerful secret society in the world. That's maybe a little bit over the top, but unquestionably, there was nothing like this anywhere in Africa, and that was the big expose of them. If you'll take a look at the image on the screen in front of you, that is from right at the back of that book. At the back of that book, they actually managed to get hold of a big chunk of the list of the people who were in this Broederbond, and there's an arrow on the top left there pointing to P.W. Botha, and P.W. Botha was a member of the Broederbond. He was the Prime Minister of South Africa, In fact, all the Prime Ministers of South Africa from 1948 right through to 1994, all of them were members of the Broederbond. They were members of that secret society. There were lots and lots of Afrikaans politicians who were named in this book. And so you can see this is the Jewish version of doxing back in the 1970s, trying to dox the Broederbond and to expose them. But this will give you an idea of the size and scale of the Broederbond. The Broederbond had agents in every town and city in South Africa. They had people all over South Africa watching everything that was going on. They had their cells in every place. They knew what was going on in every single town and area in South Africa with their own agents. And they could do things, carry out projects. Orders would come down from the Broederbond's main committee, and people all across the country would start implementing it. And these people won every single election. Oh yes, that's the other thing. Even though there were other competing political parties, they won every single election from 1948 until the end of white rule in 1994. They totally controlled white politics for decades. Totally. Nobody else took control of South Africa. That is how powerful the Broederbond were. And they had their own Afrikaans media, their own radio stations, and all those things. That's what comes from white teamwork. Take a look at the image on the screen in front of you. This was a news report about them. This was, I think, in the early 1990s. And you can see this is in an English newspaper. And the guy on the right there, de Klerk, had become the final white president of South Africa. And there it says, Afrikaners, Broederbond once more the power behind the throne. And it says one of the first steps that President F.W. de Klerk took on assuming his position as head of state was to drastically cut the powers of the National Security Management System, which through a hidden coup had become the essential power behind the P.W. Botha throne. That was the previous president. I knew P.W. Botha, and P.W. Botha had also been a Broederbonder. And you can see another guy, another Afrikaans guy, Viljoen, and they have some quotes about him. But the Broederbond was a real power, and it came from poor Afrikaans people after the Second Anglo-Boer War. And they picked themselves up, and they became the power in South Africa. They controlled South Africa. They ruled South Africa in the days of white rule. The only bummer for them was the whole world forcing South Africa to hand over power to the blacks. That was the only bummer for them. I'm going to read a few paragraphs from an academic paper written about the Afrikaners and the Broederbond. So you can see it on the screen in front of you. The Afrikaners' struggle for an effective voice in the South African economy prior to 1948. Because the Afrikaners lost everything. They lost total control of the country, and now they were impoverished, ruled by Britain and the Jews, and they were struggling. So it says this: during the years immediately before the Anglo-Boer War and for several decades afterwards, Afrikaans-speaking whites poured into the cities. The white urban population of South Africa grew from 36% in 1890 to 75% in 1946. In the 19th century, urbanization for Afrikaners had been concomitant with Anglicization. Indeed, in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Afrikaans-speaking workers had become deeply involved in the labor movement, especially in the mine workers' union. Leaders of the Afrikaans-speaking community, especially churchmen, fearfully anticipated the complete disappearance of the Afrikaner. Led by post-war Afrikaner nationalists like Dr. Milan, they raised the cry, "Back to the land." That's almost like return to the land in America now. But they were really worried that they would lose their nation because everyone's being urbanized and being sucked into capitalism. Capitalism basically dominated by the English and the Jews. And they decided that they're going to try to get their people back, to herd their people back so that they can function as a single group. Now that is exactly what modern whites need to do everywhere in the West, is we need to bring our people back so that we can start taking control of politics. We need to get control of politics. We need to get control of our own media, and you'll see more of the Broederbond thinking. Let me read some more. It's on the screen in front of you. Since the 1930s, then, Broeders had realized that cultural unity around Christian national ideals could not be limited to the platteland. Platteland is the rural area. That's the South African term for rural area. Could not be limited to the platteland, but must extend into the rapidly growing numbers of urban Afrikaners as well. This was achieved by absolute insistence on Afrikaans language schools and strong support for General Herzog's policy of, quotes, civilized labor, which used state power to elevate white South African standards of living above those of their black compatriots. In the 1930s, however, the Afrikaner Broederbond also mounted a direct attack on the economic front. Listen to this. As early as 1934, Professor L.J. Du Plessis, a major Broederbond theoretician, had published an article proposing what he called Volkskapitalisme. You can translate that as the people's capitalism. The people's capitalism. It's folk as in the German Nazi way. The people's capitalism. The threat to Afrikanerdom lay not in capitalism as such, he argued, but rather that the proceeds of capitalist enterprise were benefiting English. Let me jump to the next section. Let's go to the next page. English-speaking individuals rather than the Afrikaner community. Afrikaners must break into the world of English-speaking capitalism. and multiracial trade unions and transform both for the benefit of the Afrikaner folk. Exactly the same kind of thinking as the Germans. Let's continue. The purpose of our economic struggle is thus national, even Christian national, as against the personal and sectional. As organized Afrikanerdom, we wish conspicuously to take part in the economic development of our land, naturally in order to ensure our own existence, but above all to restore our people to prosperity and so enable it to fulfill its God-given calling. In the past, we accented as inevitable that the masses who were unable to adjust to capitalism quickly or well enough should drop down to poor whiteism. Sympathetically, we belittled them and separated ourselves from them, or at best offered them alms in a philanthropic manner. Meanwhile, this process of adjustment was destroying our people by denationalization of its economic leaders and proletarianization of its producing masses. But in the awakening of self-consciousness, the people has become aware of this also, and the new ethnic movement is intended to prevent the further destruction of the Afrikaner people in an effort to adjust to a foreign capitalist system and to transform it so that it fits our ethnic nature. So that is a very interesting set of thinking there by an Afrikaner, a leading Afrikaner theoretician in the Broederbond. Notice this is in 1934, and they are thinking somewhat along the lines of the Germans, and even using similar kind of thinking, talking about the Afrikaner folk, and they're going to save their folk. They're not just going to let their folk be absorbed by English capitalism. They realize that the English are making all the money. The English and the Jews actually, are controlling the business and the economy of South Africa. And if their people work for the English, then all they're doing is making the English rich. Whereas they should actually be getting into the game of capitalism and competing with the English and the Jews in order to get money for them. And a particular problem of the Afrikaners that is unique to South Africa is that the Afrikaners are the ones who've struggled the most with poor whites, because there are people in their society who ended up really struggling and who can't make it. And so they are trying to create a, let's call it an elite system, an elite Afrikaner system that will benefit all Afrikaners. And their goal is to pull their people together, is to pull basically all the Boers together as a group so that they can compete with this globalist thing that has forced itself upon them despite their best efforts on the battlefield, and that they need to stick together as a group. And they went all out. They created all the organizations they needed. They created an Afrikaans version of the Boy Scouts called the Voortrekkers. They created Afrikaans schools. They created the curriculum for their schools. They created all the kinds of structures that they could possibly need as a people. Some of them are money-making. Some of them are, let's call it, non-profit organizations or charities. And they used absolutely every conceivable form of organization and saw to it that Afrikaners had their own version of everything that the English had, and that they could start beating the English at their own game. And in the end, they beat the English and the Jews at their own game. So that should give you an idea of how you play the power game against other people who are richer than you, who've got all kinds of power that you don't have. And as I mentioned to another guy, Brant Williams of School of the West, I said to him months ago that at the end of the day, we the common people are up against people who are billionaires. We're up against people who are really, really rich. And they've got a lot of power. They've got companies, they've got people who work for them, they can hire all kinds of lawyers. And then Jews themselves have got lots of organizations. last year I was talking to some Muslim attorneys again, and the one Muslim attorney said to me that the Muslims find themselves in court fighting the Jews quite often. And one of the things about the Jews that impresses the Muslims was how tightly the Jews work as a team. And he was telling me how the Jews organize the legal stuff so that all the Jewish lawyers get a piece of the business. And Jews channel all the stuff through to Jews. And he said, man, the Jews are even tighter than we are. It impresses us. And that is the real issue at the end of the day, is that ultimately, as a group, you need to fight back as a group. Because we ourselves as whites, we are targeted as a group. Everyone's attacking us. Everyone's telling us to shut up. Everyone is stopping us from making payments and things. And if you look at that image that I got on the screen in front of you there, quick one that I threw together, at the end of the day, if you really want to have power and you really want to have independence, if you really want to be free, you've got to have things that you control and own. And we actually need to see to it that we channel money through to the things that our people control so that our people can make the decisions that are needed that ensure that we get the things that benefit us. Because that is how the game is played. It's played like that by everybody, everywhere. And you're not going to get anything if you don't have that structure. If you just walk around to any old social media and so forth, you're begging them to give you a chance. And if they disagree with you and they don't support your stuff, or they are just rampant anti-whites or whatever, then you're stuck. You're stuck. You can't do anything. You can't do anything, even if it's important, even if it's true. You can't do it. So at the end of the day, we have to function together and working together in a system that is composed of our networks with our infrastructure, which we control, which we defend, which we look after. That's the way forward. Because when you're playing a power game, when you're playing with the rich and the powerful, you're moving into another level. So many people have said to me in the past, this thing is unfair. They're doing this to us and it's unfair. Well, I got bad news for you. That when you want to play the power game at the top, it's a ruthless game, okay? And nobody cares. Nobody cares about fairness. They care about winning, okay? There are also other people, I've raised this before in other contexts, when it comes to negotiations, dealing with other groups. Now you're going to go to other groups, ask other groups for help. Consider, for example, liberals deplatforming you, okay? What are you going to do now? Are you going to go to a black network, and go and beg the blacks, please, I'm a white guy, I want to tell a story, it relates to whites, but I don't have a network. Can I get a chance on your network, for example? I want to tell you from the deepest story, when it goes back to politics and everything, looking back on my life in Rhodesia and in South Africa, I want to tell you now that you will never get a chance in life when other people have got power over you. Those who have power are going to keep it. Whether they are rich whites who are anti-white, whether they are Jews, whether they are blacks, whether they are whatever. If someone else has got power and you want to do something for your community, for your people, and it's not in their interests, they're not going to help you, okay? And to walk around and to beg and plead and try and strike deals with people, it doesn't work, okay? And when it gets to the real power, like politics, when it gets to real power, politics, money, control, big business, I want to tell you, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. And others are not going to give a shit about you. And 9 times out of 10, it is better for them to deny you that ability. They don't want you to succeed. All this liberal baloney and claptrap. We're all going to live together. We're going to sing Kumbaya together. Everything's going to work together. All bullshit, okay? All of that's hogwash. It's total hogwash in the real world. In the real world, if you want to do something, you must gain control of things. We need to have our own media. We've already got a good media that's out there. Lots of people are doing things. But how many people are still dependent on other people's platforms or on functioning via social media that's not really friendly to them? Or they run off to somebody who gives them a little bit of leeway on some things. And I've watched over the years as people are mass banned over here, then they run over to somewhere else, then they're mass banned over there, then they run to somewhere else, then people are hiding on Discord and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, we need to get things where we've got control, so that we've got control and we can do things. Initially, our issue is free speech, okay? Initially, it's free speech. That's our first and most important battle. It's the most important battle. But there are other places. There are other places that we need to gain ground. Take, for example, PayPal. How many people have been banned from receiving money via PayPal? And PayPal treats you like a sack of shit. So we need to solve problems. And we need to find solutions to all the problems. Now, in some cases, we can piggyback on other things. There are other areas where we can do things this way or do things that way. But take, for example, this banking example. If we have our own networks for our own media, and we can put out our own media and control our own media. Imagine if we had our own banking, or we had our own companies that could move money. Imagine if we had our own payment systems. And then we say to people, use our payment systems because then we can make profits for ourselves, and those profits will be fed back into our own projects. The more we can bring things together for us under our control, not only things that we run ourselves, but things that we own and profits that we make, and we decide where are we going to invest it and what is the next thing that we need to create. And there are many technical problems that we need to solve. In some cases, we're functioning like guerrillas. The vast majority of the white right functions like guerrillas. We go onto the social media, we sneak onto different social medias because they still have the monopoly of access to the vast majority of people. So we function in a guerrilla manner. And I must say that there are lots of people who are very clever, and there are people who've managed to pull off great feats where they sometimes get huge amounts of followers on social media and they manage to wangle their way through it. Very clever. It's very clever. And it works very well. So people with limited resources are still able to pack big punches and to get things to go far. However, ultimately, we need to be competing with those people. We need to start competing more and more with them to the point where they start losing customers and where they start seeing that we can pack a punch too. Another area that I have done videos on in detail is lawfare. The fact that we really need lawyers. We really, really, really need lawyers. We need lawyers in a big freaking way. We need lawyers in a big way, everywhere. I must tell you, I battled my ass off with lawyers. I struggled so much with that. And I've seen what happens to people. There are whites who are sitting in jail because we don't have lawyers and law firms that are on our side. At the end of the day, you will find that you actually need structures that cover all the bases. If we could ever get into the financial stuff, into things like payment systems, that would be the ultimate goal. That would be the ultimate goal. One guy that I know who lives in England, who used to be in South Africa, and he was very much into money and business. That's all he lived for. But he reckoned to me that if you've got enough money and you go to those Swiss banks and things, they'll create things for you. He said to me we could even have our own credit card system if we wanted. But he said to me at the time, this was back in about 2017, he said to me, you'll probably need to fork out like $10 million. But if you can fork out $10 million, you might just have your own credit card system that you can use across the world. And these are the kinds of things we need to aim for. We need to look to see how can we overcome problems. And we need to find solutions to all these problems. At one point in the past, companies that hosted websites were ruthlessly shutting websites down. That happened to me about half a dozen times. And I struggled here, struggled there, struggled here, struggled there. But eventually what happened, from what I can see, is that there were so many websites getting shut down. So many websites were shut down that were not just white right. They were other people with other stuff. That there were so many websites that were getting shut down that eventually there was a type of company that came into being which had different technology, and this different technology allowed people to do their own hosting. It was much more complex, but they basically allowed you to do your own thing, and they would never interfere with you unless it was illegal. If you actually break the law, then they'll come and nail you. If you break the law, they'll come and shut you down in 5 minutes. But if you don't break the law, they will otherwise not care what the hell you put on your website. As long as you're not actually engaging in actual crime, they won't care. So that is an area where those nasty hosting companies took some losses because they shut so many people up that eventually there was a demand for the ability to have websites without interference. But at the end of the day, if you want to have your free speech, if you want to have your functionality, you have to start taking over things. You have to start taking over things and owning things. Like those young people who've got returned to the land in America, that's fantastic. That's exactly the way you need to go. In South Africa, whites have been doing that for decades at a place called Oranje, but there's actually more than Oranje. There are smaller places and less successful places than Oranje, but they do exist. You just haven't heard of them. There's another one in Pretoria. There's one in one part of Pretoria, and then there's another poorer place on the outskirts, on the western side of Pretoria. So there are such other places, but Oranje is the main one that is the most famous. And Oranje is run by an organization, and they've got certain rules that enable them to find a legal way to get what they want. It's quite a complicated mechanism. Here in South Africa, the Afrikaners are the most organized whites. Because of them losing the Second Anglo-Boer War, and finding themselves aliens in their own country, ruled by Britain, they were forced to pick themselves up and to build something for themselves. The Broederbond has, in the meantime, collapsed. It's not totally gone. It still is there. And it probably has a hell of a lot of money, actually. I've actually done a whole video on the Broederbond. And the Broederbond has got probably billions of dollars stashed away in all kinds of companies. There are other companies in South Africa that are probably Broederbond-run companies, even now. But the Broederbond, and especially the church which was linked to them, between the politics and the church, they suffered big losses. However, there are lots of Afrikaner-controlled organizations in South Africa. Another area where they are particularly successful is in schooling, Afrikaans schooling. And using their language as a weapon, they are incredibly successful, actually. The only place in South Africa where you can find like schools of pure white children are Afrikaans schools. The blacks don't like Afrikaans as a language. The blacks prefer to speak English. So it's very few blacks. There are some blacks, but very few, who will put their children in Afrikaans schools. But here in South Africa, all the English schools are totally black, and then you drive past an Afrikaans school, and it's virtually all white right now. It's virtually all white. So the Afrikaners very cleverly used their language as a weapon. And I've got to say it's been damned successful. So whereas the Indians have used Islam as a tool to get what they want for their religion, the Afrikaners have used their language as a unique tool to get control of a lot of their people. It's very, very clever. You do get English, like in the case of Elon Musk's family. You do get some English who've let their children go to Afrikaans schools as well. But in South Africa, even now, despite all the things that have gone wrong for them, the Afrikaners actually have got the most infrastructure that is useful for whites. And the Afrikaners have got things like AfriForum, they've got Solidarity. These are also organizations that get money. They're like non-profit organizations, and they get money from Afrikaans sources. And like AfriForum has got enough money to have a full-time team of lawyers. And the Afrikaners actually not only fight for Afrikaans, but they actually fight for whites. The Afrikaners are the only ones who are organized enough to be able to fight for white rights in South Africa. And so they do it in court. They use their media. They use the courts. They fight back. They've got the money. They go and they tackle the government. They fight the government in courts every now and then, constantly. They fight back against new laws. They do lots and lots of things. The Afrikaners are the most organized whites in South Africa, and they've got the most organizations. They also control lots of the farming organizations. So they've got organizations to help the farmers. They've got schools. They're very successful in schools. They've even got Afrikaans universities. They're very successful in all those areas. And they just say, well, these are Afrikaner values and we're protecting our language and it's our stuff. Anyone is welcome to come, but in reality, most people don't want to come unless they are in favor of the Afrikaners. So you don't find Indians sending their kids to Afrikaans schools, and there are very few blacks, but there are a handful of blacks who do end up in there. But it's a useful tool. So if you don't have total control of your politics, you still have got control of lots of other things that are really, really, really important, that helps you to hold your people together and retain control of their minds. You can teach them in your own schools. You can have your own media that gives your side of the story. Also, your own publishing houses. They have got their own TV channels in South Africa. There's Afrikaans TV in South Africa. There are lots of Afrikaans things in South Africa. They've made sure they've created all the things that they need. The only thing they don't have control of is the government because of the rules of the country. There's even an Afrikaans political party that has got some seats in parliament, that still fights in parliament. So that'll give you an idea that this is how you fight. Ultimately, you want to have enough power, you want to have enough money, you want to have enough reach that you can get political power. In America and Europe, where the majority of the population is white, despite all these other things, whites are still well placed to gain control of politics. Whites can still regain control of politics in the future. You just need to get enough organizations together. But you're going to have all the things so that you're not dependent on, let's call it, enemy organizations that are going to trip you up, that are going to suddenly defund you, that are suddenly going to pull the plug on this or pull the plug on that. You need to have control of all of these different things. And this also opens up a place for ingenuity, for whites to come up with specialized organizations. There are problems that the white right has that are unique. Payment is an example. And we need to ultimately find solutions to these problems so that we can have methods and mechanisms that nobody can come and interfere with, where you can do your stuff, do your transactions, and nobody stops you. And there are many small niche things that individual people could do. There are also all kinds of problems, including technical problems, where people with the right skills could maybe come in and come up with solutions to certain problems. And for example, I've been looking this year at stickers because other white right organizations have overcome the problem of being banned from advertising by either using banners or stickers as a way of spreading the word. And so that's something that I've also started asking people if they're willing to spread stickers on my behalf. Regardless of the country they're living in, I'll give them some stickers. They just have to contact me. And these are the kinds of things that we need to do if we're serious. We have to do all sorts of things. And when you're in a conflict and when you are in a struggle for power, which is exactly what's going on here, Other people who are rich do not want us to have our own say in public. They do not want our viewpoints to spread. They do not want us to gain influence over the wider public in the Western world. They do not want us to get money. They do not want us to have political power. They do not want us to have business power. So we need to create all the tools that we need. And with all the things that they're doing against us, there are unique areas as well to either solve problems or to even invent new things. Take, for example, the concept of a meme. Memes are a modern invention, and memes are very powerful. So there are many, many things that creative people can come up with and try to use different methods and try all different techniques. And you never know who comes up with what, and then it helps us all jump to the next level. And in this kind of thing, there are many, many niches for people to get involved in. There are all kinds of things that whites can do to help other whites, and we need to build up stuff so that we are helping each other and working together for, you could say, the folk, for the race. And the beauty about this is that by solving these problems, we're getting to power. And I also should mention, what about the Freemasons? Freemasonry is probably controlled by the Jews. I came across mention in older documents that in the late 1800s that the Jews bought out all the Freemason lodges in the world, and there seems to be some evidence for that. And I've spoken to Freemasons, and Freemasons are weirdos, and they have got all kinds of rubbish anti-white values. But look at Freemasonry. Look at Freemasonry as a system that also worked for financial and political power. Freemasons have managed to get all kinds of power in the world, including financial power. The people who are losing out are your common heterosexual whites. All these other weirdo humans have managed to infiltrate into our societies and gain vast amounts of power, to the point where, there's Donald Trump getting like more than $200 million from some Jewish female, So at the end of the day, what we need is a movement where the white masses create everything that's needed for the saving of common white people across the Western world, and to give white people power. We need to get power. We have to follow in the footsteps of what the Germans did so very well. And if you look at the things they had to do, they also had to fight for their free speech. Literally fight people to have chances to just give speeches. And they had to fight in court, and they had to set up their own media. They had to organize all their own stuff. We have to do that now because we're up against big corporations and all kinds of nefarious groups who have quietly been gaining power over the last 100 years. And they think that now they can crush us all and we're all going to be gone. But if we work together, if we stick together, if we help each other, I'm certain that with our creativity and our IQ, we will be able to beat the billionaires. I've made other videos talking about this as a concept. Years ago, I made a video called White Labor versus Jewish Capital. I made a video about that, discussing that that's the battle that's coming. And I'm certain that if we use our brains and our abilities and we learn to stick together and we learn how to handle the nasty situations that come our way, that we'll be able to take these people on. Those billionaires may think that they can rule us, but they might find out that we're going to be matching them and beating them at their game. They might be arrogant today, but we're going to get real democracy and real free speech, and it's going to function the way that it should function. But we need to be willing to work, need to be willing to put effort in, need to be willing to take risks, put our money where our mouths are, and work away at this thing. And then I don't see any reason why we can't win and why we can't get the whole Western world back and running the way we think it should be run.
Very good speech by Jan Lamprecht, right? History Reviewed, who should be joining us very shortly here for a question and answer period. But fantastic, very well done, and I couldn't agree more about the need for white infrastructure. We have him joining us now, and perfect timing. Perfect timing. We're here and we're live and we're ready for the question and answer period. I'm here with Jan Lamprecht. Welcome to the Lyceum, and thank you for not only sharing such a great speech with us, but for taking the time. I know it's late where you are to come and chat with us.
It's an honor to work with you, Flood. I'm very impressed with what you do. So it's great to be part of this.
Thank you very much. What I'll do here is I'll just make a quick adjustment to some of the filters here, and we should be pretty easy. This is going to be easy for you because we didn't have too many pointed questions as we have had sometimes in the past. But you touched on a lot of things. I think the first thing that I keyed in on was that you were sort of a website expert. You had mentioned early on implementing the internet into your technology stack very early on. Do you consult on websites? Do you still do website work? Is that something that you still utilize or develop, or are you kind of beyond that now?
I actually do it mostly for myself. I have done one website for somebody else recently here in South Africa, but I mostly do it for my own purposes. And yes, I regard it as very important, and I that is also why maybe you'll understand this more than some of the people in the audience, is that even though I could just let things go, I always like to do website and internet and computer related stuff because it's good to sort of keep my hand in and be aware of technology and be able to keep up with things. And I'm finding technology is delivering all the time. And with the latest technology, it's really fantastic. So I regard it as very, very important. Another way of looking at it is you should see these things in military terms. If you go and you look in military stuff, because you're waging a war, okay? The Our enemies are waging a war to prevent us from having free speech, to prevent us from gaining an audience, to prevent us from spreading ideas and doing the very things that we're allowed to do. So you should see this as a war where those with the money and the power are trying to stop us from spreading our own thoughts. So in military terms, you should see it almost like they have a thing called jamming and
Yes.
electronic warfare. You should see it as jamming and electronic warfare. And it requires a lot of technical skill. You've got people who've got technical skills who are trying to stuff up the thing that you're doing. And so you now have to engage in a battle to try and find ways to carry on doing what you're doing without these people destroying your stuff. For example, my website's been hacked from early on when I got involved in this. The first time my website was hacked after like a year or two, I looked at my website one morning and the website was gone and it said hacked by so and so, and kind of screw you, a big screw you kind of a message left there, etc. And so we got enemies who are coming and using all kinds of methods of trying to stop us. And we have to learn to develop the skills to overcome it, because for most people will just give up. But this is why we need organizations, why we need groups, why we need people working in teams, why we need people who sit down and try to solve special problems, like the way that you've been trying to solve special problems and you've made your breakthroughs. So it's taken you a bunch of work in order to achieve something. And I myself have always used my websites as my means of surviving censorship and stuff, so that, even if they hack it, and they do all kinds of things, you still want to carry on, and you don't want that to now bring it to an end. Most people can't handle that, but if we are to move forward as a group, we need to get more sophisticated. And that's basically what I'm getting at. You need to look at this as ultimately requiring the same kind of effort as a job. If you go, whether you learn to be a computer programmer, or whether you learn to be an engineer, or whether you learn to repair motor car engines, you have to learn a whole bunch of skills, and it can take years and years to learn those skills. Now, in our movement, we need to build up all kinds of skills, and it's stuff that in many cases is not going to be easy. But when you attain those skills, then you can do something. You can move to the next level.
Very true, very true. And it's interesting you mentioned that a lot of people won't even know how to react to this until they've been hit. And you don't think about what life is like having an enemy. You don't think about what life is like when somebody's spending all their time working against you, and you spend so little time even in your own interests. That it's almost a foreign concept to people, and it really is a change in mindset that's required to kind of look at infrastructure in this way, and use it the way that they do against us. Fashbird has a great question. I think the first real question here, which is, do you see a changing in the tide concerning white South Africans, particularly as things there are going downhill very, very quickly? And I'm going to assume this is kind of in comparison to, when you talked about getting started out.
Well, South Africa's always going downhill, and then there are so many times. There are actually a number of times where South Africa's been so on the edge of like total collapse, especially in recent years, especially since COVID. I must tell you, COVID is the closest that South Africa came to total collapse. Um, and the people who actually save South Africa these days, it's not the blacks who save South Africa. It's always whites,
Of
either
course.
normal whites, either normal whites are saving the country in 101 different ways by simply either doing their job, or whites who are catching criminals or whatever. But you also get where the country is really on the edge, okay, where this country is getting ready to just fall in a heap. There was a thing that I posted about 3 or 4 years ago, where one of the biggest banks in South Africa, Nedbank, actually said that South Africa is like on the verge of total collapse. It's going to fall apart like any day now. But what I've found is that there are quite a number of wealthy whites in South Africa, and then there are, of course, are lots of wealthy Jews. And what these bastards do is they go and do all kinds of other things, even engaging with the United Nations, or engaging with other governments, to then come and save South Africa from collapse. I personally don't see the collapse of South Africa as a bad thing, because I actually look on it as the thing that we need. We actually need this country to really start collapsing. The fact that it doesn't collapse totally, and that there are all these other rich people propping the country up, means that people start relaxing, and then people say, oh, well, things aren't that bad. And all these people who've been saying that the country is in a bad state, they're just making it up. So unfortunately, the continued survival of South Africa is a liberal type of thing, a liberal Jew white thing that continuously saves this country from collapsing. If these wealthy bastards didn't keep saving the government, this country would have collapsed a long time ago. would have collapsed well over 10 or 15 years ago. This place would have fallen apart in a heap, and the whites could have come out and grabbed it and done things with it. It's that is the way that I see South Africa. I actually would prefer that this thing just fall apart completely. The sooner it does it, the better, because whites are and whites are actually getting better and better at surviving in South Africa. There are more whites who know how to do all kinds of things. Whites are actually in a better and better situation, and it's the blacks, especially the government, that's just getting worse and worse. Everything they're doing is not working anymore. Like our electricity, for example, to give you an example of electricity, electricity is run by ESCOM, and the electricity has been getting so bad that for years we had lots of blackouts. Then, just before the last election in 2024, they all of a sudden the government came and said that there are going to be no more blackouts, and I was like, what, no more blackouts? How is that possible? Because your stuff at ESCOM is the parastatal that creates the electricity,
Hmm.
because you're not solving anything. Well, I only discovered in the last year that the wealthiest white man in South Africa, an Afrikaner named Rupert, and he works with the Rothschilds, with the Rothschilds in England, and he and Rothschild went to the World Bank or whatever and got a big freaking loan for the government. So what's happening? The reason we've got electricity for the last year and a half now, is because Rupert and Rothschild got a loan for the government. The government obviously isn't able to fix anything, and from what I discovered is, as I surmised, the ESCOM is just as inefficient as it was before. It's even more inefficient, but it doesn't matter because the government is paying their bills, paying all the bills, so the blacks can steal and be useless, and they can do all these things despite the fact that you know they they they're just being paid by the government. Now the loan is eventually going to run out. I don't know how many years the loan is going to be able to pay the bills, but everything is still as inefficient and maybe even more inefficient than it was before, but they're being saved by the rich. The fact is they probably can't pay the interest back on it, but who knows how the next bailout will work. So for me, I get very irritated by that. I actually
Right.
wish the damn thing would just collapse completely, because it would make it so much easier for whites to start doing their own thing. White people are the only people who are really whites, and even to a certain extent, some of the Indians are actually the most functional people in South Africa.
No, it makes a lot of sense when you say that that things kind of need to reach the precipice and collapse so that the old guard can fade away or be dealt with, so and then make space for, make the power vacuum for people with more, vision and foresight, and frankly just more ability to run into a civilization can come in and take over. That, I guess, that's always going to be kind of the revolving door there, I suppose, until whites come back into power, right? At least that's the idea in general.
Yes, the fact that the country is kept going and the government's kept going keeps the illusion, because now there are whites who've become liberals, and it keeps the illusion that they are competent in some way and that there's nothing to worry about, and you just carry on working inside the rules. Whereas if the whole thing breaks and you get violence and you get collapse and so forth, then people get angry really quickly. Whites will get angry really quickly, and
Yes.
you'll see all kinds of things. So, in fact, there's a special video that I still want to make. about the events of July 2021. Keep an eye open for the events of July 2021. I've got special film footage where I'm going to show you some wild, wild things that you've never seen before. Then a lot of things that I'm telling you about whites will make a lot more sense.
This is during the height of the COVID scare, July 2021.
It actually wasn't part of COVID. It was something else that happened. It was something political, and it was very violent. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Yes, okay. I know you had to be careful what you can say and what you can't say. We don't all have the same freedoms, apparently, as whites in other parts of the world, and there's a lot of inequity in what people can say and do where you are versus where we are here in the USA. I'll try to keep that in mind at all times. Fastbird.
Don't worry. That wasn't the actual problem.
Good.
What I want to do is I want people to see the videos and to see actual film footage. Then you're going to see some really, really cool shit. Really cool shit that you won't believe.
Video is what makes it all pop, for sure. Fastbird says she recently read that only 4% of jobs in South Africa can go to whites. Is that true? Is there a 4% cap on whites in the workforce?
That could be possible. That could very well be.
Shocking.
Whites, the last I heard, whites were about 7% of the population. But it's very possible that either they've downed it or they also do all kinds of nasty things as well. So it sounds very reasonable. It doesn't sound unreasonable. When I was working, when I was clinging on for dear life to my last job, which was at a bank, I clung to it for dear life for 14 years, and I did so because I knew that at my age as a white male, if I lose my job, I won't be able to get another job. I won't.
Yeah.
So I was living on the edge, plus trying to do my website and everything. It was very, very stressful, I will tell you. And in the end, they did get rid of me, but I was ready for them and I gave as good as I got. There's actually a little video that I did years ago. It's called something like Jan is not a team player. And if you want to find it, it's sitting on my history reviewed thing. If you do look for it and you struggle to get it, then just ask me and I'll find a link. It's something like Jan is not a team player, and it's about my desperate battle in my final years as I fought against management, and I also hit back as best I could with my limited power, and I also landed a bunch of punches on them. I even managed to get someone demoted, someone high-ranking demoted. And right at the very end, I managed to get a labor lawyer, and I fought them and so forth. It was ugly and it was ruthless, but that's how it ended. And once that ended, then I tried to work on history reviewed and see if I could try and build up something using a combination of my savings and whatever I can get from people in donations.
This is very interesting because you've been, obviously from the beginning, you've met with resistance from the enemy, and the enemy has essentially leveraged as much power as it could muster against you in the form of censorship, in the form of punishment, of just simple deplatforming, and very blatant censorship too. One of the things I've run into, which I found very alarming, was that most of the resistance I encounter comes from our own side, not from the enemy, not from camps of clandestine Jews or anything, but from saboteurs and people in our own movement who seem to be very ego-based, or there always seems to be some sort of disagreement at the heart of things, or perhaps it's a debate. Perhaps there's some of those flat earthers we talked about earlier, or they're religious zealots, or So pick your poison, but there's a number of people on your own side that will trip you up and try to ruin your platform. We don't even really need Jews at this point. You know, is that have you experienced that as
I
well?
I have experienced that in certain ways. There are also groups of people who have quietly kept me out of things. They will not deal with me. For example, there's an American I know who's part of part of the Patriot, I think part of the Patriot Front, and he's one of my supporters. Now, there are people from South Africa in the so-called conservative slash right who've gone to America, and some of those people actually have quite a lot of money and a lot of power. Now, we should be on the same side. Those people will go and talk to you Americans. They will never talk to me. And they will never talk to me. They'll never acknowledge me. They won't allow me into their circles. They'll keep things away from me. And I know exactly what you're talking about. It is very annoying. And then to see them go to America or wherever, and they go and talk to other people. They talk to Jared Taylor and stuff, and but they will never share anything with me. They'll never acknowledge anything that I've done that's been worthwhile, or that I risked a lot in order to do. You'll never hear anything. So it's not quite sabotage, but it's like quietly being pushed aside and ignored.
There seems to be an eroding force, sort of beneath a lot of the structure. If what appears to be structure, I guess I'd say that's to be sufficiently vague, I suppose. Let me get on to the next question here. Fashbird says, considering the size of the white population in South Africa, do you feel whites will eventually need to move to other white nations? Is there eventually a bug out, or is that an impossibility?
This is a very interesting topic, and it's a topic that I'll be revisiting again in other ways. But people are hard to move in large numbers.
Yes.
People ultimately, when you need to make people move, you'll see it's actually extremely hard. You Americans are much more mobile. I have many American friends and supporters, and you Americans are much more mobile in your ability even to like sell your property in this state and move to another state, and you don't like the taxes here, so you move somewhere else. You people are very mobile. In the rest of the Western world, it's not the same, whether it's in Europe, but also here in Africa. And another thing is people also don't have the money. There are some people who are not wealthy enough to do any of these things, and they hang on to what they've got, and they just hang on for all they're worth, And there are people that go down. Now you do get some people. There are people in South Africa. There are quite a number of, tens of thousands of people in South Africa, whites, who are actually pretty damn wealthy. And, they just won't do a damn thing for their own kind, some of them,
Right.
many of them, in fact. So, moving people is a much harder thing than you'd believe. The reality of life is that most people will cling to what they've got, and they will literally have to have someone kicking in the door before they do anything. So that is the way it actually is. And even if you go and read history, like I read a lot of history, including World War II history, you'll see that most people are like that. The idea of abandoning South Africa is just not a practical thing. The reality also is that the Afrikaners, like those guys that I mentioned in the talk,
Yes.
the Afrikaner Broederbond, I will tell you that the Afrikaners do not see any other place as being their home. They actually see South Africa as their home. There is a certain amount of nationalism hidden inside the Afrikaners that's actually very impressive. And the Afrikaners regard South Africa as their home. The only problem is that they've lost control of it now, and they're in a spot. But even, as I was talking about the organizations that the Broederbond had,
Yes.
to this day, there are lots of Afrikaans organizations in South Africa, and the Afrikaners, much more so than the English, the Afrikaners, much more than the English, are able to like have a kind of a culture and a group thing going even now. You'd be amazed how determined they are to hang in there. So the only thing is they don't know how to solve the problem of what do we do politically next, and that is a topic that I'm going to be discussing in the coming months as I go through various videos. I'll be discussing this in much more detail. I personally believe that if whites in South Africa would just freaking work together, that we can still do something here. We should. I'm totally against the idea of just abandoning the country, because I constantly fight back against the notion of retreating, because I don't think it's necessary. But the thing is now to
Yeah.
convince 4 million people that they need to do some really hard work. That's a tough one. But there are some very interesting things. There are some very interesting discussions that go on in South Africa among the Afrikaners, and I will deal with that in videos that are coming over the next year. You're going to see some very interesting things. You'll be quite surprised by some of the thoughts as these whites like are determined to kind of cling to South Africa. And I'm very much of the same nature. I don't see I don't see that there's a need to abandon things to others. And if you have a national socialist attitude, then even you've got even more reason to not want to quit. I'm very much a believer that whites everywhere should fight back. You
Yeah.
should fight back and push back for all your freaking worth. That is the correct thing to do.
That's
And
the Aryan
don't
thing, is what it really feels
Yes,
like. Yes. It's
yes,
it's
because
anti-Aryan to secede or to give up.
to just give up,
Yeah.
to just give up. Um, I actually did a pretty cool video that I think was a pretty useful video that some people were very impressed with. It was a video called something along the lines of advice for people in hopeless situations. If you give me a second, I'll look it up on my website.
Sure.
It
Feel
was
free.
a video. It's a video that's called. I can actually, maybe I can even give you a link. Um, I'm just quickly going to search. Let's see if I've got it. Just give me a second. Got it. Got it. It's here. I'll give you the link. I'll pop the link into your Telegram.
Sure.
And anyone who wants to watch it, it comes from General von Manstein. It's from Hitler and General von Manstein, and also Guderian. It's advice on hopeless situations for nations. Watch that video. You're in for some surprises. What do German generals say?
Passing this on to the chat rooms right now. Thank you very much for sharing that. And guys, yes, check this out.
Check it out. See what
The National Socialists.
experienced German generals have to say about giving up.
It just it doesn't sound like that's, none of our stories end that way. It doesn't seem like that's the way any Aryan tale would go is the escape to Argentina. Like, I see where it's fanciful and romantic to some, but I think generally most of that is sort of just degrading to our spirit and our desire and our ability to not only just, I hate to say go down with the ship, but to commit to fate, right? Uh, um, because you're there in
Well,
victory as well as defeat, but to commit to your
let
fate.
let me just give you a very short synopsis of what the guys say. The guys basically say that there are many times when you think you're in a hopeless situation, but the reality is that often that's not the case. But you won't know unless you've actually fought. That's what it boils down to. And this comes from men who've been in deep, deep shit where they thought we don't stand a chance. I think what he I think what he's probably referring to is probably the Second Anglo-Boer War that that I was mentioning to you that the Boers were very poor, and that for many of them, even my own parents, they said the only book they had in the house was a Bible. They didn't even own books. They were that poor. People don't realize how poor the Boers were 120 years ago. And the Anglo-Boer War was basically a bunch of Jewish contrived bullshit. It was basically like with the Germans, except it happened in 1899. It was basically a contrived war, a Jewish contrived war, to get the British to invade South Africa to defeat the Boers and to take the two Boer republics. To this day, despite all the problems we've had with the blacks, to this day, can you believe that a war that was fought between whites more than 120 years ago was the most brutal and ruthless war that ever took place in South Africa? And when the British came, they brought in whites not just from Britain itself. There were Canadians, there were Australians,
Mm.
even New Zealanders who came to South Africa to shoot Boers.
From all over the empire, huh?
All over the empire. So and it was so that was globalism. That was basically Jewish globalism coming to grab the gold and the diamonds that the Boers had. That was what it boiled down to. And believe it or not, to this day, Jews as well as English speaking English whites own most of the mining of South Africa. The Afrikaners never really recovered any of that. So other people have made unbelievable numbers of billions of dollars out of the wealth of what used to belong to the Boers. So that is why the Boers and the Afrikaners nowadays are also skeptical of the English. It left them with like a real bitter taste.
Yes.
It's kind of the way the Germans would feel. So one can understand it.
Yeah, I
But
can only
that's
really
that's
imagine.
life.
That's it for the questions. I do want to say thanks. I know this was the first Lyceum that you've spoken at, but I hope it won't be the last. It's very much a pleasure to get to talk to you. Yeah, I'm a fan of your work, and so I probably spoke a little more than I normally do on Lyceums, but it's very much been a pleasure working with you, and I'm very interested in some of these ideas we've talked about, and doing some future episodes as well. Just I think it's a really good time to be creative in our community. It's time for some of these things that we had them. we've needed them for long enough, and I think the Lyceum is one of those things. And I appreciate your working with us to put this one together.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and you'll definitely have more from me. So we'll be talking a lot. And I'm looking at your all your AI things that you're doing. It's very interesting.
If you look
I'm
too closely, you'll
impressed
get
by
in
what you
trouble.
do.
Yeah, be careful. Some of those may be a little bit spicy for where you're at. But I always tell people to beware. At the very least, they may be offended, but I don't think you will be.
Done. All that matters to me is the truth. That's the only thing that matters to me. That's what I
Bravo.
try to put out, and I think in that sense, you and I see absolutely eye to eye.
Yes, yes. And with that, we're going to close this edition of the Lyceum. Thank you very much again, Jan Lamprecht, for spending time with us. I know it's midnight or beyond where you live, so thank you again, taking time out of your schedule and doing a late night with us. And we will wrap this up. We'll be back in the morning with a normal morning show, and then get back on our typical schedule after that. We'll talk to you behind the scenes. Thanks again, Jan.
Thank you.
Goodbye, friend. Fantastic. We're going to go ahead and switch over to piano and then sign out from there. Thank you all for joining us on the fourth Lyceum.